now I can finally introduce Sarah. So she is the horticulture agent for the Campbell County Extension, and she's also a very frequent guest on Cincinnati Edition's gardening topic show on NPR on WVXU, if you ever happen to tune in there.
All right, wonderful. I will also add in the past, I welcome emails, phone calls, pictures. You can come to our office. We are open. So I know last year I had a few emails that came my way. I do have my email address. Feel free, Greg, and I'd like to share that information should someone come later to ask, of course. Okay. I'm just right on the other side of the river in Campbell County. Every county throughout the state of Kentucky has a cooperative extension office. I'm not going to get too in depth with that, but the land-grant universities is a wonderful resource. The Ohio State is Ohio's land-grant university there, and unfortunately, they don't have an office in every space or throughout the county. In every county, but Kentucky, we are very fortunate. So come on over and join our classes as well. Take advantage of the spaces that we have. We have a wonderful education garden at the Campbell County office. So I welcome you to frolic in our garden. All right, so these first few pictures to me is what gardening is. It'd be ornamental gardening, or vegetable gardening. This is one of our volunteers, and to me, this just says it all. Like today, I don't know, the last few days, I've been just like, I'm trying to take in all this vitamin D as possible, and this just makes me happy. He's been a dedicated volunteer for over 23 years. That's Mr. Ron Higas. And even when I see a piece of property like this, I actually was just in Wilder, Kentucky, which is a small community next to Highland Heights where my office is located. I get this question a lot. What do I do with this space? It'd be a community garden. It seems like quite a few of you are involved with the community garden program there at the Civic Garden Center. Maybe you're thinking about starting something, and some people, and this is what we're here for. Let's take this and jot ideas and go through different phases. So I love doing projects like this, okay? So for this sake, we'll just kind of, envision this as a beautiful community garden. This is the beautiful picture of the sunflowers, that this will be kind of like an intermission, if you will, different points throughout the presentation to ask questions. Again, this is one of my other favorites. I was doing some work in Lexington and just seeing the youth involved from all different cultural backgrounds, age groups. It was just, this is inspiring to me, to teach our youth, to teach the next generation, to get them involved. And we all know this. When they get involved, when they give back, and then when they're in through that whole process of gardening, they are more likely to eat those fruits and vegetables that they grow, and of course the other health benefits that come along the way. Of course, one of my favorite vegetables to grow is sweet potatoes. It's like digging for gold. If you've never done it, try it at least once. And just seeing the hands of these youth harvesting for the first time or maybe the second time, it's always is very inspiring for me to continue and build curiosity and to engage those youth into the gardening process. I don't know about you, but I love going to the farmer's market and I love eating. So with all of this, we need our farmers, we need agriculture in order to eat. So this is kind of like the agenda or the guideline, what I'm going to go through today. Of course, this could be a whole topic. My undergrad degree is in plant and soil science. So yeah, this is just very microscopic of what I've learned. But of course, let's dig a little deeper and have further conversations. Please reach out to me, okay? So let's think about vegetable gardening in all of this. Of course, if you have any other questions, like you have a shade garden in a particular part of your landscape or, in your community, reach out to me and we can address that. But again, for this presentation, let's think of vegetable gardening. So envision that space a few slides ago, that open space with full direct sunlight, or maybe envision a place in your community where you're thinking about putting a vegetable garden. So let's get started. It's always really good for most vegetables. We need full sun. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, okay? But let's start with full sun. We also want to make sure we have well-drained soil, and sometimes that's very, very difficult. In particular, the site in Wilder, it was backfilled that they, this particular piece of property. And I took my soil probe trying to take soil samples, and I couldn't even get down like an inch into the soil, or lack thereof of soil, into that media there. And so my recommendation is to build some raised beds, okay? So the reason why we want to build raised beds is to encourage good drainage, air circulation, and good root structure and form into that soil. When you're looking at your space, you know, look all around you. Look for different structures around in the landscape. Look at the trees, maybe surrounding houses. And as you note there, just be mindful that the walnut tree, Juglans nigra, is naturally toxin to a lot of our vegetable plants, in particular the Solanaceae crops, tomato, eggplant, and pepper. And so just be very mindful. It's not going to hurt you if you digest that, but the plants are going to come very warped, almost as if they were hit with a non-selective herbicide. So they just don't develop very well. If you're not sure what a walnut tree looks like, then you know, reach out to me. I'm sure Greg can help you as well. I will go ahead and address this quick question, because what is full sun? Great question, Greg. So a lot of times, I always like to recommend 6 hours. Now, depending upon what you're growing, I have growers that only grow cool season crops. Then that's going to be a little less sunlight. For example, cool season crops are like your leafy green vegetables, for example. But most of our summer crops that a lot of our home gardeners in particular grow, like the Solanaceae crops, like the tomatoes, eggplant, peppers, and all that other good stuff, a lot of our herbs, they need at least 6 hours of sunlight, okay? Again, exceptions to that rule. Raised bed gardening. I quickly mentioned this. You know, with any kind of container gardening, it be, you know, you have a small space on your patio and you just have one container, 1 gallon container of some herbs, or maybe 1 tomato plant. Because it's above soil, our native soil, just keep in mind that you are going to have to water a little bit more frequently, okay? And it may warm up a little faster. And keep in mind the type of container that you use. I really steer away from using black containers for vegetable gardening, just for the simple fact that it attracts a lot of heat and it can really hurt the root system. But I really do enjoy working with raised beds, primarily for my back, my whole body. It's easier to harvest. I can really control the weed population. I can also control soil compaction, okay? I'm pretty certain that a lot of the soils in Ohio, just like northern Kentucky, are very rocky and clay. So you can definitely help with managing that. So get this question quite often: how do you build good soil? And, you know, when I was taking those soil samples over at the Wilder site, the soil was gray. And in fact, I'm not even going to call that soil. I'm going to call that dirt. Dirt is a very bad word. It's like that 4-letter word that we teach our young children. Dirt is what you find on the bottom of your shoe. It's non-living. It doesn't have any microorganisms or beneficials in that soil. We want that beautiful gold, black, brown colored soil. That is living, okay? So just like you see here in the hands of this gardener, really nice. It looks very loose. I don't really see clumps of soil. I really like that color. And you can also smell the soil. I know that may sound a little silly, but I mean, smell it. It should smell earthy. You shouldn't smell, any kind of, foul odors, okay? So this is very brief. Again, composting and soils is a whole other lecture, so I'm just going to get into this very briefly. So of course we love our earthworms. All right. They help channel the airways and the wall, and alleyways for our roots to anchor into the soil. They increase the exposure to oxygen that our plants need. Okay, so we like our earthworms. If you haven't ever heard before, there are some worms that are being found in our landscapes, and unfortunately we have them here in Campbell County at our garden, and they are the jumping worms. And maybe I can send you, Ellie, that for people to keep an eye out for that. It's an invasive species, and in fact they don't do they're not providing much benefit to our landscape. In fact, they're actually out competing our native earthworms that are decomposers, and that's what we need in our landscape. Okay, cover cropping. I'll cover this a little bit more as we move in through the PowerPoint. But cover cropping can be any type of material like a red clover or winter wheat, even simple things like chopped up leaves or your chopped up grass clippings that haven't had a herbicide application on them. So those are all great additives to put into our vegetable gardening or our vegetable garden. Of course, compost. We all know, or maybe you don't know, but compost is a well-managed system. I'm very guilty of this, especially at my work office. I have a, quote, compost pile of plant debris, but really what that is a pile. It hasn't been managed and rotated, and I haven't turned that over, so it's decomposing all around. It's only really decomposing and heating up in the middle there. So if you're needing more information about compost and what you can compost, because not everything can be composted, reach out to me and I'll give you that information. But the green material is going to be very beneficial into our vegetable garden, and over time, it will add nutrients back into our landscape for sure. Super, super important, fertility of our soil. To me, I'm not a medical professional, but I get my blood test done annually. And that blood test tells me, what I'm lacking in or what I'm good at. And then sometimes I'm deficient in vitamin D. Well, if I need vitamin D, I get, so many units that my physician prescribes to me. It kind of helps figure out what other underlying issues may come. It's very similar to a soil test. It's like the backbone of our whole garden. All right, so it's super important. In Campbell County, we offer free soil testing to all residents. Maybe some of the other extension offices do that as well. I am not sure in Ohio, but pretty much all of Kentucky, extension offices offer this service for free or minimal charge. And with that gives you your pH range. We'll get to that in a quick second. But if you're needing instructions on how to do that, we have a YouTube video on our website. Of course, give me a call, and here's very simple instructions. Not only for vegetable gardening, but it's also important for any type of landscape installation as well, because certain plants need certain types of nutrients and a pH range to be successful. Let's see. All right, I know this may be a little blurry, but what I want you to see here is you may remember in maybe Chemistry 101, you have that pH range from 0 to 14 and 7 being neutral. And most of our native soil here in the Northern Kentucky area, and again, most likely in Southern Ohio, is about a 6.3 to a 7. Very, kind of neutral, slightly acidic. And for most vegetables, that is completely fine. Exceptions of a fruit, for example, like blueberries, they like more of acidic soil, and maybe some of our other fruit trees, they prefer more of that acidic soil. Some of our landscape plants like hydrangeas, azaleas, rhododendrons, some of our evergreen trees like more of that acidic soil as well. This photo on the right is a very generic, what you'll receive from the UK Soils Lab. I go through all of those, and then I make particular recommendations to the client based on what is tested. And it's really nice to do this, especially during a first installation, and also as a routine to make sure that everything's going well. If you're adding compost annually and other organic matter, it's even more important to get this test on an annual basis. And the fall is the best time for most vegetable gardens. All right, I kind of went over this. I was ahead of myself here. So if we get that report back and say I understand a grower is wanting to grow some blueberries, and they're acidic, and they're acidic loving plant, the blueberries are, but your soil pH is maybe a 7.6, which is a little bit alkaline and it's too high for that blueberry plant to thrive. So I'm going to recommend most likely a rate of sulfur to lower that pH. Lime is actually going to increase that pH more to that 8 range and higher. Most of our vegetable gardeners and growers, we don't need to add lime. Again, there are exceptions to the rule, but most home gardens, I've never had to recommend adding lime. Yes, some sulfur, but very rarely lime. Exceptions would be for growing turf or growing corn. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. All right, reading a fertilizer bag, whatever you may have. So there are 3 numbers, and on this slide you see a 5, 10, 10. It's kind of on the lower bottom of that. I brought with me here, this is a fish emulsion here. If you've never experienced the smell of this, it is horrible. So just be mindful of that. It is an organic product. And the fertilizer ratio on here is 5:1:1. Excuse me. And those numbers represent nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And you can see there what each one, those functions of those nutrients, those are macronutrients, why they're so important, why we need a test for them. And for example, tomatoes, I get this question quite often. My tomatoes are not blooming, or they're not fruiting. They're growing. I see a beautiful bud on them. The flower but I don't see any fruit. One way that can happen, and it's not the only reason, but is that once I start asking some other preliminary questions, it's kind of like a CSI, which I enjoy doing. They've been adding too much nitrogen or too much other fertilizer with a high nitrogen value. And once, and that the plant doesn't need to grow. As you see there, the nitrogen is for green growth. And so later on in the season, you really want to add more phosphorus and potassium to that crop. So I will go ahead and start mentioning this book, and I will give you this information. It's ID 128. Home Vegetable Gardening in Kentucky. This is free both in our office and online. And with that, talks about all this kind of good stuff, plus more, okay? It's very basic, and it's a very good resource. But it gives you information on there about side dressing as well. Side dressing means simply what I just gave the example of. You have your tomato plant, it's reached its height, but now we need to fertilize it for fruit production. And it goes over that in this book here. So just be mindful, and I get that question quite often. There are some other reasons as well, inconsistency of watering and some environmental stresses, but that's usually the number one. Okay, I love asking this question, and I really want to see people's faces, but unfortunately I can't. I only see Ellie, so maybe Ellie, you can, play with me on this. over fertilization is better, right? Like the more I put on my garden, the better and more lush it's going to be, and the more healthier it's going to be. Is that right?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? All right, you must have heard this before. So you're right. It can be very toxic, not only to the plant, to that particular ecosystem, to you, but it also has a negative effect on our water bodies. And so this was Beargrass Creek in Louisville, where I previously worked, and this was runoff from car pollution, from nearby residents, over fertilizing either their lawn or whatever they were doing. So it negatively affects our ecosystem and our drinking water. And our water system has to actually treat to get all this phosphorus out, for example, and it actually could build algae growth as well. All right, so here's that beautiful sunflower picture. I will take some questions now. Ellie, I don't know if you've seen any more.
Yeah, there are a couple that were asked early on. So Julie was wondering what your thoughts on front yard vegetable beds are.
I love that question. So I recently had a conversation with some folks about just this. And what I feel is beautiful may not be someone else, you know, what my weed is someone else's flower, and vice versa, right? You know, what one man's treasure is another man's garbage, right? Or whatever those cliche sayings are. I'm probably saying them wrong, but you know what I'm getting at. And so I think vegetable gardening is great, but we have to educate our neighbors about it. You know, tomato plants may not look beautiful, especially in the summer when they start getting leaf blight and insects are coming around, and you know, they just, to some people, they just don't look pretty. I like to put a border of sunflowers or zinnias to kind of disguise it a little bit. I say if you have the space, go for it. Though there are some city ordinances. So before you go planting and spending all that time and energy, please check with your city ordinance. And depending upon where you are and your relationship that you have with your neighbors, you know, maybe kind of plant that seed with your neighbors so that there's not, you know, some kind of riot that forms from all of this. I have seen, or not seen, I have heard some horror stories where people have planted and then people come by with Roundup or some other type of non-selective herbicide and has damaged people's property. So, you know, a lot of times either with rain gardens or vegetable gardens, whatever type of, what I will say a guerrilla garden would be, I always just put in some really pretty sunflowers or zinnias and maybe invite those people to harvest and take a bouquet home with them. So I hope that answers your question. I would want you to be my neighbor, and then we can just tag along and just continue that. But yeah, just check with your city as well. And maybe if you have a homeowners association, I know some homeowners associations don't allow for rain barrels, compost bins, or even vegetable gardens.
Great. We had a question from Jenny. She's wondering what distance a garden needs to be away from walnut trees.
Very good question. I've never found a very hard answer on that, but what I will tell you is that anywhere around the drip line, for example, and so say I'm, you know, the tree here, and my branches are 2 feet on either side. You want to go twice the drip of that. So go out twice. And the toxicity mainly resides in the roots. And it also can have residual in the leaves as well as the nut itself. So just be very mindful. If you're ever able to acquire some wood chips, you know, free, or maybe some ground up leaves from a walnut, you can use them in another landscape. I would just caution you using that as a mulch or an additive compost material in your vegetable garden. So, and then also, if, you know, it may be something, if instead of growing, right on top of conventional gardening, you may build a raised bed, but just be cautious of any fallen leaves or fruit that may enter into that landscape.
There's a question from Caroline about growing loofah plants. She said they grow like crazy but don't produce flowers until late September, and she was wondering if that was because of her soil.
No, so they are like the loofahs and the gourds, pumpkins. So you usually plant those in the late summer, July-ish. And so that's just when their season is. You may want to think about looking at days to harvest when you're ordering your seed to seeing if you can find a shorter day one. If you have any questions about that, but just let me know. They do need good pollination, just like all of our other our pumpkins and things like that. So good sunlight, invite those pollinators in. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Was there any?
There were a few questions about soil, like if you have a recommendation for where to buy soil for a raised bed, or what if somebody wanted to buy like a bagged soil off the shelf, what you would recommend?
Okay, so I always recommend, if you've ever heard me on the radio, I always say spend your money in the soil. Not that pretty pot, not the most, colorful plant. Spend your money in the soil, okay? And then you're going to add to that annually, if not more. So what I mean by that is we want to make sure that we are not, if we're building a raised bed, for example, or adding soil into our landscape for vegetable gardening, we want to use garden soil, not potting soil. Okay, there's a big difference. All right. What I like to do is when I'm using, building a raised bed, if I'm building it 24 inches high or whatever the height is, the top 8 inches is going to be where my golden soil is, meaning that composted soil. I've used all different types of media from bag soil, just because of the volume that we use at our gardens. I buy bulk, either from one of our local farm supply stores like Southern States, for example, or I know Hafner's over in Cincinnati. We've used them quite often, and I really like their mushroom compost and their leaf mold. That's just to name a few. But I also like to go to these sources and talk to them about their soil. I have called Hafner, for example, and asked where they source it. So, a good company likes to talk dirty and likes to talk about their soil. So, ask those questions. I don't like to buy soil media for my vegetable gardening that has additive fertilizer in it. I like to control that, but that's not to say you can't use it, okay? You can use peat moss. Just be mindful of using too much peat moss. We add a little bit into ours. I don't have a real, quote, recipe for it. I can give that to you if you'd like, but we just buy or purchase bulk material, and that seems to be doing very well for us. And then we just add either green manure onto that annually, cover crops, and Mother Nature just gives it right back to us. And yes, peat moss is not sustainable, as it is taking away from those tropical places where it comes from. Good point. And so I like to, I'm a person that if it's in my yard, I try to repurpose it as much as possible. There's grass clippings. There's a great nitrogen source. Those leaves are great. So as much of that Mother Nature can provide to you, if you have ornamental grasses in your landscape, when you chop those down, use that as the mulch. They decompose very quickly. So very good point. All right, we'll move on here a little bit. If I didn't get to your question, jot it down and maybe at the end, or email me, okay? I think we're on to the fourth topic here, which is good plant selection. We'll talk about resistant varieties. I'll give you a few examples, the different seasons of which we grow here, and let's just say the tri-state, and a few different growing techniques. All right. I don't know about you all, but we've been receiving all of these, and I'm not advertising for this company. This is just one that I took off my desk, one of, I don't know, a few dozen. So you should be receiving some of these. If you haven't, that's fine. This is just a seed catalog. I learn a lot from these seed catalogs. This gives me inspiration. This gives me ideas. Because what you find in maybe the box stores or your local nurseries, there's many more varieties out there. There's some that specialize in tomatoes. There's some that specialize in different cool season crops like your leafy greens. So I'm just going to show you, when you're ordering, it's really important. One strategy is to find seeds that are resistant to certain diseases, okay? You may, if you're only heirloom, you're not able to do that. But if you've been a gardener before, either vegetable or ornamental, unfortunately, there's not a disease free or a pest-free plant unless you're gonna just put silk flowers in your landscape, which my childhood neighbor did. So when you look at your, I don't know if it's kind of blurry, but what I'm getting at are there different codes here. And some of them are going to be early blight resistant, which is a huge disease problem here in the tri-state, late blight, and the tomato mosaic virus, just to name a few. So when you're choosing plants, make sure you're choosing varieties that are resistant, because you're gonna have less input from any other cultural or chemical application, to be organic or synthetic. So that's really, really important. The seasons. Sometimes it surprised me that our gardeners are not aware that we actually can grow all year round. I mean, like right now, there are farmers out there growing. And so there are different techniques that can be implemented in order to do that. And we'll kind of mention a few here. But most of our gardeners, when I teach, they're either interested and or only think that we can only grow from Mother's Day until about Labor Day, and then that's pretty much it. So just know that the window of opportunity is much larger than that. And with that said, there are different environmental needs in order for these plants to thrive and for you to get a good yield. And we'll kind of go over that as well. All right. As I mentioned, there are 3 seasons in gardening. We have the spring garden here. So these are our cool season crops like the kales, lettuce, some are in our root crops, radishes, carrots. So keep that in mind. And in the home vegetable gardening in Kentucky, there are quite a few calendars in here that give you, your first planting date and your last planting date. So it's a really great guide, because sometimes when we buy seeds, sometimes that information is not in there, or it may just be a very generic recommendation. All right. Of course, most of our gardeners are well familiar with the summer, the summer garden, and we have a grower here in Campbell County that actually has in a greenhouse, and he heats it up, and he is able to market and sell his product months before the rush of the traditional tomato season. And so he has a technique that he uses in a high tunnel or a greenhouse structure, and he's able to do that, push some of those and get high dollar for those, which it seems like most of you are just for home gardening, and that's fine. Of course, one of my favorite seasons to grow is in the fall, mainly because the temperatures are not as hot, there's less pressure from disease, there's less pressure from insects and other environmental pressures. And I just really enjoy this season. And the carrots are so sweet grown in the fall. If you've never tried that before, plant a few and you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, extending your growing season. I briefly mentioned that before. These are just PVC pipes that I bought from the local hardware store, and I anchor them into a rainbow, and then I put plastic over them. It's not high tech at all. There's different grades of plastic. I get more into that when I'm talking with a grower, like a commercial grower. But for a home gardener, I would just get the plastic, and that's what I use at the office from the local hardware store. And right now I've started ranunculus, which is a cool season cut flower. I'm testing that out. But you can really start a lot of your cool season crops and even some of your summer crops, because under here, it gets hot quick. And so it's really fun to see things germinate and thrive a little bit quicker than, say, your traditional growing techniques. This really is what can happen, and it can grow quickly. And so if you're someone who travels or goes out of town, this may not be something that fits your lifestyle, because especially our leafy greens, you can get a quick turnaround within a month and a half. And once it starts growing and once you start harvesting, you can start harvesting about every 3 or 4 days. And with that said, I've had growers that can harvest all the way through the Thanksgiving holiday, rest that spot, and then now they're already they've already planted it for the spring. Of course, with the low daylight, it is going to take a little bit longer, but it heats up really well. I've also used this technique, I forgot to mention, last summer, I put black plastic. And what I was getting at is we had some wind-blown weed seeds that came in, and I'm not using any type of chemical. It'd be organic or synthetic. I'm not wanting to use any type of herbicide in our vegetable beds. So I used a technique called solarization. So I just put that black plastic over, and it did a very good job. That chickweed that was taken over our garden smothered. I would remove it after a few months, and I put it back on, and it smothered again. If you're needing more information about that, let me know. But that was a great technique, and farmers use that as well. This is always a very fun, intensive gardening. This is really just, you can Pinterest, you can Google this. I mean, you can get all kinds of ideas about vertical gardening, small space gardening. What I want to share is that, just because traditionally a watermelon grows on a vine on the ground, well, maybe if you get a small individual watermelon, maybe trellis it and let it grow up if you're living in a small space or something like that. And I've had a gardener that did that, and she made like these little hammocks, pillows with her nylon stockings that she didn't wear anymore. And it's just inspiring to see different ways that people are utilizing their space and the intensiveness of all the different types of crops that can be grown in a small space. You don't need acreage. You just need to be creative and understand the growing habits of these crops and plant it accordingly, and you can eat from it all year round. There's different other techniques you may be familiar with: square foot gardening, succession gardening, all different types of techniques, of course. If you have any questions about any of those particulars, I'll be glad to go over those with you. Caroline, sorry, I just saw this, so I'll go ahead and address your question. Where's a good place to get trellises? I like to repurpose as much as possible. I have found bamboo. We took out a grove of bamboo in our garden years ago, and we were successful after quite a few applications of hard work. And I use that. I try to use repurpose any type of staking system. Now, if you go on some of these gardening websites, horticulture supply stores, they get pretty expensive really quickly. And so I'm a person that I just like to repurpose. I like to see what people are throwing away and kind of repurpose that. I would encourage you to research different techniques and make sure that things are in place, because you may not think, but once tomatoes start growing, for example, they can really weigh down some of your structures. Or if you want to grow a loofah or some of these little individual pumpkins or gourds, they can really put a lot of weight on your structure. So just be mindful. If you need help, I mean, I get inspiration just from Googling things or talking to my coworkers and friends. So yeah, very good question. All right, we are on, let's see, proper irrigation. I think I'm doing pretty good on time here.
You're fine.
I know Greg is like, wow, last year I just kept talking and talking. So proper irrigation is, I would say, is maybe the second top most important thing. First being soil. And so we'll dig right into what this means. When I was in college, I had to do an internship, and I did that at the UK Arboretum there in Lexington. And I remember my supervisor was like, well, you're not watering correctly. And I'm like, I mean, I have a hose and I have a wand and I'm watering. No, this is how you do it. She was very nice about it, but I didn't know there was a proper way to water, right? And so we'll get through that. I'll show little pictures here, but there is a wrong way to water and there is the correct way to water. Of course, I'm going to mainly focus this conversation on vegetable gardening, because these techniques may not need to be implemented for all types of landscapes, but again, particular into vegetable gardening, okay? Of course, if we're going to, you see the benefits there. For vegetable gardening, it's really important to water at least 1 inch of water per week. Well, how do we know that? Well, range gauge will help. Your fingers will help as you dig down in there. So just keep that in mind. Of course, when you go to your box stores or flip through some of these magazines, you're going to see all types of irrigation equipment and tools. Really, I like it to keep it simple. I like to hand water for a few reasons. One, it's therapeutic for me. And when I have raised beds and I'm watering, I like to talk to my plants. Okay, I'm confessing a few things here. I like to talk. I like to look at nature. I like the wands that are long, elongated, and have more of that shower. There may be different dials. I don't prefer those, and I do like the shut off and shut on, the turn on valve. Okay, I strongly recommend you not to get a rotating or those oscillating. I mean, I love playing in them when I was a child, and my daughter enjoys, jumping around in those oscillating ones in the side yard. But for vegetable gardening, it's not going to be the best, mainly because it promotes foliar wetness, which increases the susceptibility to disease. Of course, there's a few other things too, environmental issues that go along with that as well. I like to use, and what I like to educate about is really focusing on that root zone. For vegetables, you really don't care about the foliage or the fruit itself. You really want to just focus around that root zone, around the soil and right directly into that plant. Soaker hoses are great as well, and I will have a picture of what that is here shortly. And the ideal time to water is early in the morning, not 3 o'clock in the afternoon. One of my, it bothers me. A few things are volcano mulching, and I don't know if you know what that is, but off topic a little bit, but it hurts my heart when I see volcano mulching around a new landscape next to some newly planted trees. And the next thing that it breaks my heart is at 3 o'clock and humid July day, and I see the irrigation going off in this development to water the grass and the sidewalk. And so there's many things wrong with those pictures there. But for vegetable gardening in particular, most of our landscapes, early morning, not late in the evening. Late in the evening meaning, 7 or 8 o'clock in the summertime, at least an hour or more of sunlight so that transpiration can happen. You don't want to leave that plant wet in the evening, because that can really promote those fungal spores to start spreading and populating everywhere. So what I recommend with our busy schedules and life and whatnot, if you can add a timer on your phone maybe, or if you want to get real fancy and have an automated irrigation system into this landscape, that would be great. Okay. Here are just a few quick pictures of what drip irrigation is. They got soaker hoses, which are really what the top left and the top right is. Where the farmer is on the lower right, I think she has some drip irrigation. The only difference is the soaker hose. It emits the the water evenly throughout that whole entire. It's kind of like a hose. Except that it's porous almost. And then the drip irrigation has sporadic holes for trickle, okay? I really like that. It really focuses around the root area, as I was mentioning before, and it actually also decreases weed emergence, so it helps with weed control as well. This system here can be utilized season after season. It can be a little expensive, but you're not, you can kind of turn on that system and then go make your cup of coffee, go do your morning routine, and come back to that and turn it off or set it up on a timer. All right. I get this question quite often, especially as our communities are offering, free barrel workshops or minimal free charge for these rain barrels. People jump on them, and I've offered them too, and they're, I'm going to build a vegetable garden and use this collected water. Well, not the best of idea for your vegetable garden, okay? Especially if you're going to connect this to your downspout. Here you'll see that it is connected in the rear end here next to the shingles there to your downspout. The device on the left pointing down, that's your overflow valve. But as you see here, hopefully this gives you a picture of where I'm going here, is that our shingles collect a lot of pollutants, including fecal matter from those, birds that like to perch up on our roofs. And so I really prefer you to, yes, add rain barrel systems, but maybe utilize that collected water to wash your car, maybe water your hydrangea plants or your trees or your grass. Definitely not wanting to utilize this water for any of the leafy green vegetables or your root crops that have that direct contact with any of that collective water. Okay. There are ways that you can treat your water, but if you are able to collect, you're going to be able to use that, especially our summers. We've had some of those drought summers, and there are going to, if you have trees or other landscapes, utilize that, or wash some of your tools off with that, your gardening tools. So, all right. So my timer went off, so I have about 20 minutes. And I think we're good. Mulching, I can't stress enough about the benefits of mulching here. One of the main reasons why our community gardens that I've been involved with, and even myself, I just get worn out on gardening as a whole, is because of the weed management. No matter, every year we see either new weeds come out. I don't know about you all, but that nutsedge weed has got to go. And so we're trying to figure out different strategies with that. But any type of mulching or a barrier now, it's just going to reduce that population You know, I love to, in my vegetable garden, I like to repurpose and use the newspapers, the cardboard, and still lay a mulch of an organic mulch on top. I don't like to use any treated mulch with any type of dyes or herbicide into them. So just be cautious if you are buying any type of mulch, hardwood mulch, sometimes you will have these additives in there, and I discourage you from using those in your vegetable garden. Here are a few different techniques. For those of you who have heard me on the radio before, one of my favorite weed control managements is that weed flamer, which is shown on the bottom left. This gentleman here actually has it on you know, like a tank for your grill. I just have one like of the camping, your camping grill, one of those smaller ones, and I just lug it around. You know, it's not very heavy at all. In fact, it's very lightweight. But I like to use that on our walkways. Of course, I'm not going to utilize that in the heat in the summer. I'm going to do that in the morning, preferably when there's still a little dew on, and you're not going to see things like blowing up, okay? It's just actually what it's doing, it's killing those top cells of those weeds, and it's not able to photosynthesize, therefore it's going to start dying. It doesn't go all the way down to the root system, so there will be have to have multiple applications. You see here too some of the newspaper. I like to use about 3 or 4 sheets of newspaper. And when you're using any type of mulch, I like to say 2.5 to 3 inches of mulch, okay? And you don't have to remove your mulch year after year. It breaks my heart when I hear that people have spent so much time and money and then they remove it every year, okay? Of course, there may be exceptions to the rules if there's a huge outbreak of a disease, but it's very rarely that disease pathogens overwinter on mulch. They prefer to overwinter, most of them overwinter on the foliage itself of their host plant. All right, I think we have maybe one more section, maybe 2 sections after this. I can take a few questions.
Sure. I'm kind of scrolling back. So there were a couple questions. Let's see, we'll get to the beginning of them. Greg was wondering if you have a favorite resistant tomato variety.
Oh, man, it's like, what's your favorite plant? Greg, why did you put me on the spot here? I wasn't prepared. Let's see, I like Celebrity, or that's an heirloom. I'm gonna have to think about this. Juliet is a grape tomato. That's really a good one. Let's see. I'm trying to think. I'm getting into more of the heirlooms, but then of course I'm learning about them. So for disease management, that's what my focus has been on the last few years. I don't have one off the top of my head. A big beef, of course, is a good one. Yeah, I guess I'm just stumped, right?
That's okay. Leave it to Greg to stump you.
I know. I wasn't prepared for that question.
All right. Well, we'll move on then.
Is it okay?
Yeah. Jocelyn.
Do I bored people, or I'm answering everybody's questions?
No. There's more questions. There's Jocelyn had a question. She works with students, and they are planting this spring in hoop houses, and they plant cold weather crops that would typically go in the ground in March.
Yep.
But she's wondering how much earlier they could plant them in a hoop house.
Yeah, so I actually have a chart for that. It's really nice. And depending upon the crop, it's usually weeks before. Sometimes it's maybe a month before. So if you don't mind just sending me an email, my contact information is at the end here, and then they have it as well. But there's not just like a general rule of thumb. So absolutely, I can give that to you. And Caroline, she did ask, I saw, do you not like heirloom plants? No, I like heirloom plants. They just need a little bit TLC. They are more finicky with environmental changes. They are more susceptible to cracking and susceptible to certain diseases and insects. So I think they taste better, in my opinion. Not everyone agrees with that. I like the way they look. So yes, I like them. They are just a little bit more finicky. So
there were a couple questions about watering. So wondering, you said not to water in sort of the peak heat of the day. Lizzie was wondering if that was basically just like watering the air if you watered at that time of day.
Yeah, so let me get back to that a little bit, so some clarification. So and I'm guilty of this too. I mean, sometimes it just, 4 o'clock hits and I got to go out and water, or, 1 o'clock and I got to go water, or the plants are wilting and I have to water. I'm going to make sure I focus on the root zone. I'm going to get my hose out with my wand and focus on that root zone. Especially with our raised bed gardening, as I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes you really do have to water twice in the heat of the summer. So keep that in mind. When in doubt, yes, water, even if it is at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but water that root zone, okay? Try to avoid any foliage wetness, because not only disease, it can promote disease, but, the rain droplets, I'm sure you guys have done this when you were young. It actually acts like a magnifying glass, and it could burn the foliage of plants, especially some of our sensitive plants like our leafy greens. Lettuces are really known for this. Sometimes you may see some browning. Sometimes that is a disease, but also a lot of times that's just watering practice. So a lot of our growers, when they're doing these leafy greens, they do drip irrigation. So it's easy for them to get that direct that water right into the root zone and avoid any foliage wetness. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you can use your finger to help know how much you've watered. And Jocelyn was just wondering kind of like how you would do that. How deep do you have to check?
Well, I go down about an inch or so. Think about the root zone. I mean, if you've ever pulled out your tomato plant at the end of the growing season, it can be like real gnarly and, roots are going everywhere. But, if you can, the deeper the water, the watering that you can apply, the roots are going to follow that. And the more drought resistant that plant is going to become. So, if you're only watering, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, the roots are going to be really shallow. But if I'm going to have a deep water and those roots are going to follow all the way through, okay? I mean, sometimes that can go about 8 inches or more. That's what we want. But if at least you don't never want that crust to be dry. So that's what that means, is at least an inch of water a week. Hopefully, with your soil, there's some moisture in there as well. But when I water, I'm watering, and this is always a tricky question. Well, how many minutes do I water a plant, right? And obviously there's many factors that go into influence that answer: environment, soil type, plant, the pressure of your water, things like that. But usually I say about 5 or so minutes on site. I don't focus on one area. I kind of take my wand and then I come back, and then I may feel that soil with my bare hands. I don't like to wear gloves. I really like the touch of the soil gets underneath my fingernails. And that's a good indicator for me. Sometimes people, they have those moisture meters. That's fine too. I personally have never used them because these are my moisture meters. So, but at least an inch of water a week. If you can really get down in there 8 inches, that would be great, because most of our root crops go about 8 inches. And if you saw in probably one of my first slides about soil testing, you want to kind of go down 6 to 8 inches to get that soil profile where that root zone is for most vegetable crops. Okay, hopefully that answers your question.
All right. Could you do two? There were 2 more that are related to mulch.
Sure. Yeah.
So one was, can you use oak leaves for mulch? And the other is, how do you keep weeds out of the mulch?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So yes, you can use oak. It has a slightly acidic value, just like pine straw, but it's not going to dramatically change. I say add it. It is organic matter, and it's going to add nutrients into your media, into your soil. So I would recommend using that. I like to shred it because it decomposes at a quicker rate. So if you have it, use it. Even if you get like oaks can get those tar spot or other disease on them, still use it, okay? That's no problem at all. If you had, and you can mix it with your grass, you can mix it with your grass clippings and any other clippings that you may have. As far as the mulch question, was it what type, or how do you get weeds out, right?
Yeah, how do you keep weeds out of your mulch?
Well, I guess I wouldn't have this. I don't know. I don't have one simple answer. I have best management practices depending upon a landscape. I try to, especially the watering. We've had a lot of nut sedge in our garden, in our ornamental gardens, and so I understand what environmental conditions that weed prefers, and I try to kind of choke it out. For example, it likes the moist conditions, and so we found that in certain areas our irrigation system had a leak, or we can turn zones off so that area stays dry. There are winter weeds, there are annuals, there are perennials, so I try to get those identified and figure out when they disperse their seeds, so that either I can cut those seed heads off, I can flame them. I mean, mulching of course, and I try not to at all compost any of my weed seeds. Of course, you're going to get a few in there, and it needs to reach ideally your compost temperature at 145 degrees to kill most weed seeds. But if you're collecting, let's just say, purple dead nettle, for example, which has thousands, if not more, maybe close to 1 million seeds, and each one of those little flower heads, I'm not going to put those in the compost because I'm not very confident that I'm going to get this 145, or if they're all going to, be dead. So hopefully that answers your question. We can talk more on that. Please shoot me an email. If you have a noxious weed in your landscape, send me a picture. I can get it identified. And what one management system may work for that may not work for another, so we may have to kind of tweak it a little bit, okay? All right, I'm going to move on. Any other questions? Maybe we can take those at the end, or of course, we can take, send me an email. All right, so the last few actually are going to go by fairly quickly because they kind of all kind of go together. So the plant monitoring, good sanitation, and crop rotation. And some of this may actually address that mulch or that seed question as well, the weed seed question. So I adopted this slide from one of our plant pathologists at the university, and I really, really liked it, the triangle here. So we really want to start on the bottom and work our way up. And we want to prevent. And what I'm getting here is that we want to prevent from using any type of chemical. And when I say chemical, I mean any organic chemical or synthetic, because it'd be an organic chemical, it's still a chemical. In fact, you can get toxicity from organic chemicals. Let's just say like a copper fungicide. Organic product can be harmful to both the plant and to the eater, us. So I want to prevent it, be from weeds, it be from disease management. All right, let's make sure that we do that prevention. That's in our best management practices, or the BMPs. That's our number one goal. Okay. All right, and here we go. I've mentioned this multiple times. The best management practices, and prevention. We talked about disease-resistant varieties of plants, and that's not only for vegetables. That's also for our our landscape, from trees to ornamentals, all of that, there are different varieties that have resistance to both disease and insects. Okay. Learn about the different insects that may be in your landscape. Learn about their life cycle, their habits, what their host plants are. All right. So these are a few other examples that I'd like to share with you. There are many more. And if you have any suggestions, maybe you all can share with each other. And feel free to share that with me as well. We've highlighted quite a few of these throughout the conversation today. So that's plant monitoring. We'll go on to good. Is that it? I guess that was it. Let me go back a little bit to good sanitation. Now, what I mean by that is I think it's the third bullet there, remove debris after each season. And that is really important because some of our insects as well as some of our diseases can overwinter on that host plant. And so we want to remove that from that landscape. I have left tomato plants into November, December, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll finally go out to the landscape and remove those. But ideally, you would want to do that, and you never want to leave your soil bare. So take some of those ground up oak leaves that you've collected through your landscape or from your neighbors and put that on your soil to help keep out any of those weed seeds from germinating. And just because you have a raised bed, weed seeds can fly in. They can be on birds, squirrels, rabbits, on our tools. So just be mindful that and be aware that, still practice good mulching or good weed prevention because you can still get it, okay? And my last part, what was it? Oh, yeah, crop rotation. So this is really important. If you have the space, ideally, the general rule of thumb is every 2 years, rotate your crops, really for disease management and insect management. A lot of our vine crops carry the same diseases, and you wouldn't want to put like the squash bug can overwinter in the soil. And if you're going to put, if you've ever tried to grow pumpkins or any other vine crop, you know what I'm talking about. And so just be mindful that, you may not grow tomatoes for 15, consecutively for 15 years. You may want to think about moving something else into that space if you have it. I know this is a challenge for small space gardening, but that's where it's really nice for container gardening into your landscape, and maybe you can move things around. That was a lot. I'm ahead of schedule, which I'm really proud of myself. Like to take some more questions at this time. I will go ahead and have this up, my contact information. Here's our website. We do have a Facebook page as well. We have a lot of great resources free for you all to learn. So at this time, I want to say thank you, Civic Garden Center, for having me. It's always fun. I hope in the future we could, be face-to-face or maybe a hybrid type style. But I will go and see if there's any other questions or comments or suggestions or anything else.
Yeah, Sarah, I don't know if you can read there what Greg said. He was sort of stirring things up a little bit.
Yeah, okay. So Joshua Jones, he suggests going it in weather like weather like today, like weather that we're having today. Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so you can, so some of our insects don't do well in certain temperatures, and that's why it's really important, one, to get the insect, pest, or disease, whatever it is, identified, to understand its habitat and understand its need to thrive. And so, yes, temperature could be one. So if you turn over the soil, you can definitely intercept that triangle for survival. And so, yes, that is a practice. I also like to just go ahead And especially with the snow and the cooler temperatures at this time of year, I don't want to break up the soil right now. I actually would rather just put a blanket of organic material, leaves, whatever, and then in the spring start turning that over once more sunlight is able to warm up that soil to help also not only kill those noxious insects, pests, but the weeds and things like that. Working in the soil now when it's really moist and cold can do more harm than good. It actually can further compact the soil as well, working in soil when it's really wet. So yes, he is right. And you don't, and even in a no-till system on a commercial scale, this practice is, and turning over your soil is implemented in a no-till system. I don't encourage tilling year after year because that can bring in a lot of weed seeds and a lot of other issues with soil structure and compaction. But that's one way to help reduce pests and weed seeds. I hope that I answered and further agree with Joshua on that.
Thank you for answering that. There was a question a little while back that I saved that was about cucumber beetles. And if you have any suggestions for how to kind of manage that problem.
Yeah, so cucumber beetles, let me see. Are they able to see what I'm doing?
No, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, you can simply just Google cucumber beetles, and I am sure that you have seen this in your landscape if you've grown vegetables. So there's a striped cucumber beetle, and then there's the potato beetle that looks very similar that has little polka dots, and they're both, I think, beautiful. They're yellow and with their black markings. So a few things. You can use insecticides, of course, a broad spectrum insecticide, organic or non-organic, and that's fine, whatever your choosing is. But just know that you want to make sure that you read the label to make sure that it's labeled for that particular insect. So there's a difference between mites, okay, that's a miticide, and then an insecticide. So just keep in mind that, again, get it identified, and you can use a horticultural soap. That's a contact organic product. You can use many of our synthetic products. Just be mindful of when you're spraying those, and also be mindful when you're spraying organic too, because that can also have a negative effect not only on our pollinators, but other beneficial insects like our ladybugs, for example. And then you can also use a technique with a row cover, which kind of looks like a cheesecloth over those plants, but you want to make sure that you really understand the life cycle of that noxious or that insect, so that what it's doing, it's putting this cloth dome, if you will, or a protection over that plant, so it does not allow for that insect to come in. But if you get it at the wrong time and those insects are within the that cloth, then you got a real big problem. So some of our low tunnels, high tunnel growers, they use that practice. There are some beneficial insects. I think in one of my slides here, I mentioned about beneficial insects, biological controls. There are many of those. Many people are aware of biological controls such as ladybugs and praying mantis, for example. There are many others like the parasitic wasp. There are many of those that feed on some of our other noxious pests. So hopefully that helps. I do in the vegetable gardening book in Kentucky, it also helps you identify the pest, and it gives you some recommendations, both organic and non-organic options.
Great. We had a question. Stephanie was wondering if neem oil is a good choice.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because I have that here. And I do like neem oil. I would just caution you of using it in the heat of the summer. It is an oil, and I have seen more damage to the plant because of misuse of this than good. Because it is an oil, it's called phototoxicity or chemical burn. And so because of that, you want to make sure that if this is your method for control, that you want to make sure that you apply that in the early morning, okay? Always read the label. And I don't know if you've ever used neem, but you may need to mix that with a surfactant because it can get a little oily. Read that in here. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to me and I can go over that with you. But it is a great product. I just be mindful that and a lot of these other chemicals too, not just synthetic but organic. If you overspray or misuse or go off the label, it's not going to benefit the plant.
All right, and maybe this might be our last question.
Sure.
Ashley is wondering, with cicadas coming, is there any reason to protect raised beds, or do we not really need to bother them?
With raised beds, is that what she said?
Yeah, with raised beds.
Yeah. So, yep, the cicadas are coming. I like cicadas. It just reminds me that summer is here, you know. They're not the smartest of them. If you guys have ever had experience with mowing your lawn or, you know, getting the leaf blower out, they come attack that equipment and maybe run into your head. So just be mindful. You may need to wear sunglasses more often than usual, or if something comes after you, they're not going to hurt you, okay? They're just not the smartest cookie, all right? So typically they're going to go after woody plants. They're not so interested into the soft tissue plants. I've never actually, in fact, maybe blueberries or other woody fruit, definitely fruit trees. Our oaks are heavily hit with the cicadas, maples. And so what's happening is that the female, she'll actually, here's a branch, let's just say, she's actually going to, after mating, of course, she's going to attach herself to the underside of the tree, kind of make a slit into the bark, and then that's where she's going to lay her eggs. And then after a while, the crawlers will crawl after they emerge, and then they get down into the soil, and then their life cycle starts beyond there. More importantly, I would be concerned about your woody perennials. But you know, they're going to fly no matter what. They're going to be there. I just caution you. I wouldn't recommend any insecticide. I can send you some information about the predator of that, which is the cicada killer. Some people get that confused with a hornet or something similar, and they're actually going after the female is actually going after their cicadas and feeding on them and taking them back to her young. So Mother Nature is trying to take care of them. I'm sure the cicadas are food source for bird. You know, they have a food source. Yeah, and then I wouldn't recommend, it was a very, very old practice, you know, those slits that I mentioned that people would actually kind of Band-Aid or put some type of stuff. Trees that are taken care of that are will heal just fine. You know, it's actually, they kind of would callus over. You just want to make sure that, you know, the overall health of the plant is taken care of. When in drought season, make sure you water. If you need to fertilize, get on a fertilizer program. But there's nothing that you can just start treating now. I wouldn't recommend that. I can actually give you some information about the cicadas that you can share in that email that you'll be sending out.
Yeah, sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Well, I don't see any other new questions, and I apologize to anyone if I missed something in the chat. I think Sarah is very happy for anyone to reach out directly to her, and her email is at the end of this slide presentation, which, all right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and close us out for the evening. we look forward to seeing you back at another class. And thank you again, Sarah.